But Josh Heupel with some heavy praise about Hendon Hooker that you wrote about. And it was pretty heady stuff. He didn't hold back any words. Of course, there's reason for coach speak. There's the Heisman out there. But what did you think of Josh Heupel's comments? If you can kind of re-encapsulate those from yesterday's press conference.
Yeah, it's a bold statement he made, and it's accurate too. To be fair, that Hendon Hooker's playing as well as anybody he's been around, and we're talking about a Josh Heupel that's coached. If I'm just going back through history, he's coached Jason White. Well, he was a graduate assistant when Jason White was a quarterback at Oklahoma the year after Jason White won the Heisman. Then he coached Sam Bradford. He coached Landry Jones, who was in the NFL for a little while. He's coached Drew Lock, who is still in the NFL. Mackenzie Milton was a high-profile college quarterback, and Dylan Gabriel. And so we're talking about a guy who's coached a lot of good quarterbacks. And so for him to say that Hendon Hooker's playing as well as anybody he's ever been around at this time, that's a huge statement. But you look at the numbers, and he's right. I mean, again, there's no denying 21 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, over 10 yards in attempts, passing attempts. I mean, these are just insanely efficient numbers that I don't think I've ever seen.
Well, and the interception numbers have been so incredibly low. I mean, I was talking to Chris Landry, and some people have gotten upset with Chris about pointing out some inaccuracies from time to time, not throwing the most catchable ball and all of that. And I think he's just being honest. And there have been times where I think the accuracy has waned. But when you start talking about interceptions and not turning the ball over, find me somebody that's better in the nation at not turning the ball over than Hendon Hooker. There's not one.
Oh, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of accurate quarterbacks that try to thread a needle and throw interceptions because of it. I mean, I think of towards the end of his career, Brett Favre, was not the Hall of Fame Brett Favre because he was accurate, but he kept thinking he could split double coverage, and he would lead the league in interceptions every year. And you're right. You're not, with Hendon Hooker, you may not hit the deep route every time. He may miss on a couple of passes. But I'd rather a quarterback miss on 2 or 3 passes in a game than throw. If 2 or 3 passes in a game is what he's going to miss on, if that's the price of throwing no interceptions, I think that's a pretty good sacrifice, honestly.
And Amanda, we met Hendon and visited with him briefly at SEC Media Days. This isn't always the case. His humbleness comes across in his play. In other words, how many times does he check down a pass that he could chuck deep because you've got Jalen Hyatt running down there? You could throw jump balls all day long, but he doesn't throw a lot of jump balls.
No, he doesn't. I mean, that's why I was so surprised about that last score in Missouri, against Missouri. And I know it was Joe Milton, and I understand that. I feel like Hendon Hooker wouldn't have done that. I just feel like he's more humble and more appreciative of there. That's just my opinion. A very humble, nice, seemingly very sweet kind of guy. I know that's not what fans want to hear, but
well, no, I think they want to hear that. I think that the thing about Hendon that strikes me, and I don't know if this comes across in Heisman voting, it probably doesn't, because I can't pretend to tell you what CJ Stroud's character is like. Okay, I cover Tennessee, so I don't really know. I do an awful lot of homework before I send in my Heisman ballot. I don't think it necessarily plays in his favor. I think where it could hurt you if the character is an issue that we've seen previously, and I think that's ding some guys in the Heisman. I don't think he's that guy at all. But Caleb, as far as when you look back to those Heupel players that he coached, how does Hooker stand up, do you think?
I mean, as far as NFL potential, I can't really be sure, only because, again,
Well, I meant just in college, his performance in college.
Oh, I think I would say he's been the best. I mean, and I'll go out there and I'd say of everybody Heupel's coached in college, he's been the best. The only one who I close to it that type of year was Jason White in 2003 when he threw 40 touchdowns. That was just an incredible year. But that was in the Big 12, and Oklahoma was just running it up on everybody. and then they get shocked in the Big 12 title and go play a Nick Saban LSU team in the national championship game, and Jason White just got shut down in that one. But whereas Hooker, he got shut down against Georgia, but he's navigated a pretty tough SEC schedule throughout this year. And again, we've talked about this, Missouri even. Yeah, they're not great, but they were great defensively. They had the 13th defense going into last week. Now it's outside of the top 30. And that's what playing Tennessee does to you, is they destroy your defensive rankings, whatever they are.
True. Now, what I wrote about yesterday was a lot about South Carolina and how I've said that I believe that's an underrated place to play. So, Caleb, when you go into this game, if you're a Tennessee fan, are you concerned because you saw issues with crowd noise at Georgia, or do you say to yourself, hey, that was a one-time thing? Because crowd noise was an issue, and it's not supposed to be an issue with this type of offense.
So I would say it's a one-time thing only because it wasn't just the crowd noise with Georgia 2 weeks ago. It was also that Georgia had the cornerbacks to hang with Tennessee's receivers. Does anybody here think South Carolina has a cornerbacks to hang with Tennessee's receivers? I don't. And so there was the crowd noise, yes, but there were also personnel things that, the Vols could have gotten around it if they were a little more creative. And they could have gotten around it if Heupel had called a couple of screens. We can nitpick on what Heupel should have done on some of those offsides, but at the end, or all those false starts. But at the end of the day, the real story was those things were all factors because Georgia was so good, Tennessee was already going to struggle to run its offense. I don't think South Carolina falls in that category.
Okay, I don't either. I think South Carolina will struggle. And I want to ask Andrew Lyons, who's going to join us of Locked On Gamecocks a little bit later. He is really good in breaking this down. But what is the glass ceiling at South Carolina? Amanda, let me start with you. If Steve Spurrier can't win the SEC East, and he was incredibly close one year, but if he can't win the East and you're a South Carolina fan, what are you hoping for as far as the top? What do you really expect?
I think expectations and hopes are completely different. But if you're a fan and you are just diehard, I think you're wanting to go all the way to the top. Now, South Carolina, I'm not sure, because the NIL is a different story. Recruiting now is a different story than it was back then. I think there's a lot more. Unfortunately, I think it's a lot more about money now than it was. And I know players were getting paid. I'm not saying they weren't. But now it's kind of open and honest. Like, here you are. We can offer you this much money if you want to come play here. So I think it's just a different, it's a different, I don't know, generation. It's just a different, like comparing apples to oranges. Yes, they're both fruit, but they're different fruit. And if you're South Carolina, I think what you want is you want a Saban-esque. You want somebody to come in that changes the game. You want a Josh Heupel. You want someone like that. Now, will you be able to keep them? Probably not.
Yeah, I think the glass ceiling is finances, because in that state, you're always going to compete with Clemson. So you're going to have some of the NIL money go Clemson's way, some go to South Carolina's way. So no matter what the pot is, Caleb, you're splitting it, I would say, pretty close to 50-50 because of Clemson's success over the past 15 or so years. Yeah, I don't know their budgets individually, but I would say pretty close to 50-50. You're splitting whatever NIL money is in the state of South Carolina from the get between the Gamecocks and the Tigers.
Yeah, I think with a school like South Carolina, because people will say, well, look at Clemson, they're doing well. Clemson, what they did was Clemson instituted the spread at the time when the ACC had horrible football. In 2010, they had Taj Boyd fall into their lap because Lane Kiffin kicked it or pushed him out, didn't want him at Tennessee. And they were able to take advantage of that and build a profile and start recruiting well because of it. It's going to be harder in South Carolina in the SEC. The thing with all of these schools, and I say this a lot, is I don't think anything's static, which is to say, I think all schools have a chance to become a national power. The catch is what every school has to do to become one is a little bit different. I think South Carolina, I don't know what South Carolina has to do. They have to find a way to be a little bit creative and cutting edge. This applied to Tennessee, by the way. Tennessee is not the most, before NIL, Tennessee wasn't the most fertile recruiting ground in the country. But in the 1990s, they had a 100,000 seat stadium and nobody else in the SEC did. And they had a huge recruiting budget, so they were able to go to California when no one else really did that. I don't know what the answer is for South Carolina, but the rule with any of these schools to become national powers that aren't blue bloods or in places like Alabama and Georgia where you can just pick talent out of your backyard is you got to find something creative that makes you stand out. I don't know what that is at South Carolina, but again, if it was obvious to find that creative thing, then everybody would do it.
Let's go to the message board. Say good morning to Joey. Good morning to Kevin, Nugs, Dean as well. James already on board. We appreciate you. Nugs said, do you think Joe Milton will be better next year than Hendon this year? I think physically he's fantastic. And we had this discussion on the post-game show, Caleb and I did. So let me go to Amanda first. I can't get the Ole Miss play out of my head. There are plays that you have to make at spur of the moment, and I can't get that out of my head. So that's going to take some doing. And I'm not sure, I know Caleb will want to weigh on this, but I'm not sure that Taven Jackson won't have a chance to win that job. But I'd have to see it first. I mean, you're talking about one of the all-time great performances in Tennessee football history. So I have trouble believing Joe Milton would be better.
I don't know if he'll be better just because I think there's a difference in, I don't know, football intelligence, I guess, between him and Hendon Hooker.
Well,
I think
you almost took the words right out of my mouth. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that Hendon is more, and you have that. You have people gifted, and you have people who are more, they know the game, they study the game, they can do all of that. I think Hendon the latter, Joe's more of the former, and I don't know, and I think we have to see Joe Milton in a situation where he's behind and trying to come back. Sticking him in situations now where you're up by however much and all he has to do is go out there and throw the ball around with no pressure is a different situation than being down and having to bring your team and lead your team back. So I think that's going to be the difference maker. And I think Hendon's just the better leader. That's just my opinion.
I think he's an uber leader. I think you're exactly correct. I think people get enamored with the big arm. I want to get your thoughts, Caleb, brought to you by Zach England of Best and Brock. Zach has got your back. Zach England of Best and Brock, if you're in the Chattanooga area, he has the ability to go against those big insurance lawyers and win cases for you and get you what you deserve. That's Zach England of Best and Brock. He brings you Ron Slay each and every Wednesday. Zach England of Best and Brock in the Chattanooga area. Zach's got your back. Caleb, I know you really like Taven Jackson, and your thoughts. We had a post that said, I think Jackson transfers. What do you think? I know you really like him. And then we have Joe Milton on the other side, who's as physically gifted as just about any quarterback I've ever seen. What are your thoughts on how the quarterback competition shakes out next year?
So what I'll say it's going to be a fair and open competition. I'm also going to say that I will say don't be surprised if it goes to Taven Jackson because I thought, he was Heupel's first signee. They really wanted him. But I will say this about Joe Milton and his intangibles and things like that and leadership qualities and stuff. I think it speaks a lot to his character and who he is that he could have transferred probably and found another place to start immediately. And he decided, I'm going to sit behind Hooker for another year when I've got 2 years of eligibility left, where then I only have 1 year of eligibility left next year and see how much I can develop in this system. And I think that doing that a lot of times can really help a quarterback, kind of develop leadership intangibles and things like that. So I do think Joe Milton may end up, I'm not questioning his intangibles as much as I'm not even questioning as much. I know you're bringing up his decision-making, the Ole Miss play, and that's unforgivable. But the biggest thing I question with him is if he can just that downfield accuracy. And I mean, we saw that. We've seen him connect on some of those 70-yard bombs this year. But remember, he got benched last year because he kept overthrowing easy touchdown passes the first 2 games. And so is that downfield accuracy going to be there when he's starting full time? I don't know.
And we'll see. I thought that Hendon Hooker had accuracy issues coming into the season and the first month of the season, and I got criticized for that. And he did. I mean, that's a simple fact. But the fact that he overcame it makes me think that Josh Heupel is more than just a play designer, a schematic quarterback coach. It makes me think that he's able to teach some footwork and some things that really resonate with players, because we haven't seen as many, still a couple per game, that Hendon Hooker misses a wide open wide receiver, but not nearly as much. And I think that Josh Heupel and Hendon Hooker deserve a lot of credit for that. On the website, offthehooksports.com, we talk about, this is from Caleb Giroux, did a great job of breaking down Hendon Hooker's 5 greatest moments in Neyland Stadium as the Vols closed out their run in Neyland Stadium and Senior Day on Saturday in the win against Missouri. So, guys, feel free to jump in here. But Hendon Hooker enters the game for Joe Milton, Tennessee's second game of the 2021 season. Milton goes down with an ankle injury. Hendon Hooker finishes 15 of 21 passing for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had an interception, but I thought he did a really good job of coming off the bench. Amanda, that's not easy to do.
No, that's not easy to do. I would argue, is it easier to come off the bench, or is it easier? I think it's easier coming off the bench than it is starting, because I think you have a lot of starter. Coming off the bench, you basically, here, if you can save it, but we're not expecting too much, to be honest. But either way, Hendon's done great coming off the bench. He's done great starting. So I think Hendon's just overall a great quarterback. And again, Heisman voting, if I had a vote, I would vote for Hendon.
Yeah. I haven't decided. I will say this. I think that Bryce Young has gotten lost in this story somehow of the Heisman narrative. I think he's been overlooked. So, I mean, I feel like, you get 3 selections as a voter. I feel like he'll be on mine somewhere. And then Hooker's first start, Caleb, going back to 2021 over Tennessee Tech. I mean, that was the first start. He goes out there 17 of 25 passing with 199 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was Tech, but it was also an opportunity for him to go through a full week of practice and be the man, so to speak. And that showing in Neyland Stadium is one that he won't forget, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm definitely. I think Hooker's break. I think the game that cemented Hooker was actually the Missouri game 2 weeks later on the road. But yeah, that first start at Neyland was a big one. But Dave, think about what we're talking about here, because we were questioning Hooker's accuracy versus Milton's, and that's why I say, for the questions about Milton, Hooker was way more accurate. Look at those numbers you just threw out in his first 2 games: 15 to 21 against Pittsburgh. What did you say his stat line was against Tennessee Tech?
Against Tech, it was 17 of 25, 199 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Okay, so in both games, he was completing over 65% of his passes. Joe Milton barely completed 50% of his passes last year when he was starting for Tennessee. So that's where I'm saying, even though they both struggle with accuracy, Hooker was leaps and bounds more accurate than Milton. I mean, it was so not even close. So I think that's where the question comes in. But yeah, that Tennessee Tech game was a big one. You're right. And I remember Harrison Bailey, I think, saw some action in that game for a name, if anybody remembers.
Right. Good call. So number 3, this is when we get into the really good stuff. And we get sentimental at the end, in case you're wondering what number 1 is going to be. You can go to offthehooksports.com. If you just can't wait for us to talk about it, then you can go there and read it. Caleb Giroux did a really good job on breaking that down. So number 3, Hooker runs wild to beat Florida, running for 127 yards on 13 carries and 1 touchdown. I think we all knew going into that game, Amanda, that Hendon Hooker could run, but I think he showed off against an SEC defense that was a real threat, and probably made defenses wary of his running ability moving forward.
Yeah, I think he definitely came in and did what he had to do to change defensive schemes around Tennessee after that point. You're not just prepared for the pass. You're not just prepared for the run. You're prepared for a quarterback that can do. So I think that's really what Hendon Hooker brought to Tennessee. And I think that's something that people aren't going to easily be able to, I guess, get over, for lack of better words.
Yep. Hooker orchestrates a 15-second drive to upset Alabama. That's number 2 on our list, which I know makes you wonder what number 1 is. I remember when Alabama, Caleb, missed that field goal, I thought to myself, there is no way that Josh Heupel just takes a knee and goes into overtime. And I also thought to myself, they got a darn good chance of getting in field goal range. That will be the play that most defines the plays that most define Hendon Hooker's career, because that was one of the most monumental wins in Tennessee football history.
Yeah, that, and it's, I was with you. There was no way Heupel was taking a knee. It drives me crazy most of the time when coaches do that, because if you play probabilities, you have the ball and a chance to win, take the chance, because anything happens in overtime. And he did that. The only exceptions are if you're like a defensive struggle and you're backed up on your own 10-yard line and you'd rather just go to overtime. Okay, but yeah, I thought I give a lot of credit to Heupel for going for it, going all in. And you're right, that was Hooker's heads-up awareness. If we remember that 15-second drive, the pass, I think, to Brew McCoy that got them into field goal range, Hooker was immediately screaming timeout. He was the one immediately going down to get the timeout into the ref after that. I mean, he was very aware of the clock on that drive, and that was so impressive.
Bradley's saying the energy is low. Let's hype yourselves up. Let's go, baby. It's Tuesday. We got to pace ourselves. I mean, come on. And then lastly, number 1, I thought was a really cool moment. That's where we went number 1 at offthehooksports.com. And that was Hendon Hooker directing the band, which is a Tennessee tradition, which was really cool. And I know that Omaha Productions put out I don't know if you guys saw that, the teaser video, the Peyton and Hendon Hooker directing the band at the same time. Good for him. I mean, for all he's come through, it is one of the best stories in sports, in college football, I should say, Amanda. I think that with what he's done, he deserves all the kudos, all the love. No question about it.